Hey guys, what's up? If you spend any amount of time on the internet, you will be familiar with this argument tactic where maybe you make a video or you talk about something and somebody finds the tiniest little detail that either they disagree with or that you objectively got wrong, and they'll point that out and they'll try to kind of use that as the way of getting their nose under the tent and saying, well, you're just wrong about everything. And, I see this a lot with content that I make. Once in a while, somebody will come along and they'll maybe say something like, oh, Craig said this number was 24. It's actually 26. You can't believe anything he says. And it doesn't bother me, but I want it to not bother you either. And so I'm going to explain where this comes from and why it doesn't matter. There's this differentiation between people, and Rudy has talked about it before. He's talked about how when you get older and wealthier, you take different risks with your financial assets. And when you're young and generally less wealthy, you will take different risks, and those manifest as taking more risks, bigger risks. And the good example is, let's say you hit 59 and a half years old, which in the United States means you can start drawing from your retirement accounts without a additional penalty. And let's say on that day when you're 59 and a half, you've saved really well, you've invested really well, and let's say you have $10 million of assets in your retirement accounts. That'd be quite a lot. So let's just imagine $10 million. You could invest in some pretty righteously safe assets. You could invest in stuff like Swiss government bonds, and you could accept a 2% return. And if you got a 2% return on $10 million, that would be $200,000 a year in income. And then you would pay income tax on that, and you would have the rest to live on. And so, with very little risk to your nest egg capital, you could have a very nice retirement. Now, let's take someone else who maybe didn't save as much, maybe didn't save into as good of assets, and let's say they hit retirement and they have $200,000 in their retirement accounts. And, they're looking at what they might get out of Social Security. And they're thinking about how they might be able to invest that money to give them a little more every month to live off of. Well, first off, they're probably going to be looking at somewhere 4, 5, 6,000 a month total off of Social Security and investment income. And they're going to swing for the fences, basically. They're going to take much bigger risks, and they're going to invest in things that maybe give a very high yield. They're going to chase yield on dividend stocks, or they're going to invest in highly speculative companies, hoping for them to be the next Tesla and pay off really big, something like that. And the problem with that approach is, yes, for a little while it might work out and you might get, let's say, off of $200,000, let's say you go into really speculative stuff, you get 10% yield. So it's $20,000 a year. So, you're making what, $1,500 a month, $1,600 a month. And, well, you've got $1,600 a month. The other person who took much less risk but had a much larger nest egg, they're taking what, $15,000 a month? And that's the difference. And what that comes down to is that when you're at a certain point in your life where you are comfortable with your level of wealth, you're comfortable with what that will mean for the rest of your life, you're comfortable with your ability to create value and generate income, you stop worrying about taking huge risks with your money. And the real cruel reality of this is that generally happens later in life. Generally, when people start getting into their 40s and 50s and early 60s, depending again on how much income they made, how much they saved of it, how well they did choosing assets to save into, that happens only later in life, that you kind of come to this Zen-like state where you don't really worry. What you're interested in is buying great assets at a good price and holding them for the long term. And that cruel reality is that younger people who have not yet made that much income, their income may not be that high yet, they haven't saved as much wealth, it hasn't had as much time to compound, they're the ones who feel more driven to make those risky plays, buy those risky assets, chase yield, and ultimately put them at much greater risk. And of course, you can see the problem here. Time goes linearly. And so if you're young and you believe that you need to hit a grand slam every time you're at bat with an investment, you're going to do very, very risky things, but that's going to have the effect of essentially holding you back. You'll take very risky bets. You'll do things like play penny stocks or crap coins or whatever else, hoping to hit a grand slam again and again and again so that you can get to a point where you feel like you're financially secure. And if you do that often enough, you will essentially sabotage your ability to ever become financially secure and move into that Zen-like state later in life where you're comfortable with your level of wealth and your ability to generate more wealth. And that's the real cruelty of it. And that's why you see a lot of people make these kind of arguments where, well, you got this one tiny thing wrong, so you're just completely wrong. Well, okay. I can get a lot of things wrong and still win. I can still do fine, both in business, in my career, in investing, in a lot of parts of life. I can make quite a few mistakes and still do fine in the long run. And the reason for that, especially when it comes back to investing, is that time is the big differentiator. You can make a lot of investment decisions that are bad in the short term and are good in the long term. And there's a saying that I've always loved. It's that in the short term, markets are a voting machine, and in the long term, they're a weighing machine. They can be very emotional on the short term, but in the long term, they will generally value assets correctly. And so if you buy something like a plot of land, maybe you thought it was the right plot of land the day you bought it, but it turns out you never got the opportunity to build a house there. It just didn't work out. But maybe later in life, that plot of land is now worth a whole lot more money because there's a lot of big development happening in that area finally. And that purchase of land turns out finally in the long run to be a winner. A lot of stocks work that way because over the long term, a business is a whole lot of employees who come in every day working to generate value, having new ideas, patenting things, creating new products, making sales. And in the long term, they tend to accumulate value. They create it every day. And so it's hard not to have stock prices go up on the long term. On the short term, there can be a lot of noise. You can have bombastic CEOs who tweet too much and end up swinging the stock price up and down with that. Or you can just have a short-term situation where the particular sector that a stock you're heavily invested in turns south and you're underwater on paper for a while. But in the long term, it's probably going to turn out okay with stocks and with business, with real estate, with a lot of investments, with magic cards. Think of all of the sealed magic boxes from the last 3 years that came out and went down in price. And a lot of them have recovered. Some haven't recovered yet. Some are trending upwards, and there's still a few that are stuck down there in the lows. Yeah, Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow. But in the long term, most investments go up. And that's just the reality of value creation, of how business works, of how markets are constantly expanding, populations are still growing. And so time can be the great thing that heals a lot of your bad decisions in investing. And so you don't need to feel like you have to hit a grand slam with every investment. I have absolutely whiffed investments in my career, and I'm doing fine. I'm in my early 40s, and I'm doing pretty good. You know, I've been an engineer. Engineer pay is fine. It's kind of in that middle category. It's nowhere near what doctors and lawyers and accountants make, but, it's pretty good. And I've been able to invest a lot, and I've been pretty smart about the investments, and I've been patient. That's the biggest thing, is that for the last 20 years, I've put money into 401k and IRA and post-tax brokerage accounts every paycheck, and I've bought great assets at good prices, and then I've just sat there and unemotionally watched them accumulate value. and compound over nearly 2 decades now. And so, in light of that, and with acknowledging the times I have been wrong on investments, when I see someone come along to one of my videos or something that I've talked about and try to get their nose under the tent and say, well, this one tiny detail is wrong, therefore you have no credibility, it doesn't bother me. I don't have to be correct every time. Rudy often says you only have to be correct a little more often than you're wrong. And I think we could critique that even further. I think you can actually, with investments, you can be wrong more often than you're right if you're willing to be patient and unemotional and sit and wait and let assets go up naturally over time. Now, obviously, it helps if you can manage to be right a little more than you're wrong. Most people can never expect better than that. Even the best stock investors in history made mistakes from time to time. But you can be right a little more than you're wrong. You'll do fine. And even if you're wrong a little more than you're right, you'll be okay as long as you're patient, as long as you're not trying to sell in and out of positions all the time and time the market, and you don't feel like you need to hit a grand slam every time you come to bat. And so that's why I don't worry about comments like that. I can shrug them off because, yeah, I've been wrong a lot. There have been magic boxes where I said, oh, the price will come down, and it didn't. And I missed out for a long time and ended up having to buy into a position at a much higher price than I could have earlier on. I've made the opposite mistakes. I've bought too early, and then the price has gone down. And what do? Well, I buy the dip. I average down, because if I thought it was a great product at a good price at $200 a box and now it's $150, well, it's still a great product and it's at an even better price now. So I don't worry about those things. And I hope that you can eventually find the patience and the ability to not worry about the small failures. Be patient. Think about the long run. Think about those long-term theses that I talk about, the biggest ideas that have the most compounding effect over time. Buy great assets at good prices and sit on them for a long time. And that's all it takes. You can afford to be wrong a lot in investing, and you can still do really well in the long run. Let me know what you think, guys. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my very generous supporters on Patreon, some of whom are very, very, very good at busting my balls when I am wrong, and man, I love those people. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.